Hi. I wanted to show you around a little place that I built in Horizon really early on. This is months and months ago when I first came here. I called it the Sandbox world, and it was just a test to see whether or not I could take the very, very simple tools that we have in here and the very simple shapes and then sort of imbue these in little environment tests with some sense of life. So if you're working in Horizon, you already know this, but if you aren't, there is a very limited number of shapes that you can work with, and everything you build has to be built using those shapes. Lots of ability to edit them. But I wanted to see what was the least amount that I could build with the least amount of shapes that would create some sense of story. And so these are little vignettes that I worked on to see whether or not I could come up with a tiny little story or suggest life with these simple shapes. And so this one over here is just the least I could include to create the sense of a gallery. And originally I started out with something that was just two walls, a roof, and a floor, and I had a painting on the wall and a light shining on it. And although it gave the sense of being in a museum, it didn't give me the feeling that anybody was actually here. It was really quite dead. And so I ended up adding this sort of little ashtray and a bench, and then I also added this sculpture piece, my sort of super low poly version of Degas' ballet dancer. But it wasn't until I stuck the thermos and the book here that it just finished it off. It has just enough information, even has a little teeny name plaque in the corner, even though there's nothing written on the name plaque to say museum or gallery. Over here was me seeing whether or not I could take a few shapes and then create a sense of adventure or story that would take you into something. So in this case, it's this mine shaft, and I'm using a combination of the sort of rocky shapes that I've created and also sound effects. You can hear sort of dripping cave sounds that I added, and then changing the temperature and the lighting in the space so that it felt like you were going someplace. This doesn't go very far before I decided rather than spending a lot of time in here, I just had a cave-in. But even the cave-in is done with incredibly simple shapes to just suggest that this continues on even though it doesn't. And then I've only accented the lighting in each environment. And then in this case, anywhere that there is lighting, I actually have placed a light fixture so that the lighting isn't sort of magically happening. It's actually appears to be happening due to the lights that I've placed in here. So each one of these is meant to just be a test to see if there's a way to take these simple shapes and create a sense of drama or that something has happened. Another thing I did too is I built this little ore cart that's coming out and sort of hit the barrier, and it looked really, I had it vertical and it looked kind of boring. And so when I knocked it over and had it spill some objects out of it, and then I also had one of the lights like the ones that are inside the mine shaft over on its side and out, it all of a sudden made the thing come together and suggest that there was some activity or that people had been here. And that was kind of the goal for all of these projects. Is there a way for me to, add life and energy and warmth to a space, even though I'm limited to these simple shapes? Over here is a facade, and this was me trying to see whether or not I could create something as simple as just a building facade without any other details to it. And it looked fine. It looked like being in a movie set, but it wasn't until I added the pigeons, the sort of asymmetry of scattering the pigeons, even though they're not moving at all, that suggested life that wasn't there before. Something else that I noticed in many other worlds, particularly in Horizon's official plaza, is they sort of masterfully wash everything with colored lights. And although there's no light source that you can see that's casting this blue light on the building, it suggests sort of evening or dusk. It adds a theatrical quality to the front of the building, which also allows these light fixtures that are on the opposite side of the door, on each side of the door, to add warmth to it. And you can see in each of these vignettes, I later brought in sort of a color wash light to help give the sense of drama and mood that wasn't there just by building this as just a static object. Over here was doing the same thing, and this was my friend Yasmin and I spent an afternoon working on it, and it was, could we create sort of a French cafe feel without doing the whole cafe? You know, what is the least that one can do to create a sense of being on a street corner, being in a city, and then going and spending some time in a cafe? And once again, it's certainly the furnishings, it's certainly the architecture, but it really is kind of the details that add life to it. You've got like a dog dish of water here. You've got the pigeons and birds. You have this one bird eyeing a croissant that's sitting on the table. And then inside, there's just enough furnishings to suggest sort of a high-end cafe, you know, even down to Yasmin's little macaroons sitting on the table. So once again, it's what is the least I can get away with to give the sense of story and place. And my favorite thing to build was this espresso machine, which has not a whole lot of details, but it has all that you need to suggest what it is, even down to the steaming of the milk. What I discovered was one drawback is that I put the music in earlier, and this sort of jaunty Django Reinhardt tune got stuck in my head every time I worked in here. Let's see, over here I also have a little laptop and a little espresso sitting next to it. Another thing I worked on was this little Mars habitat, and it's just sitting all by itself. There's no Mars around it. There's just enough Mars to suggest where it is. So there's a little paddock of orange with some rocks around. But then once you get inside, it was to see whether or not I could sort of transport you into the story with very, very little information. So in here, I've got this sort of spacey, computery habitat sounds. Everything in here is gray, with the exception of the light out this window. And this is a little shadow box. This isn't even looking out into the larger environment, just to suggest you're looking off into the distance. This could get a lot more detailed and a lot more realistic, but just for this exercise, just having this little sort of terrarium-sized habitat window was enough. And once again, I've got these bunk beds that have like a book up there that suggests someone has been reading, or over here there's someone's thermos, and they've been working over here in the corner, and we even included a little space bathroom so that little blocky people could use the loo. And then lastly, over here I did this little train car, and once again it was what's the least that I can do to suggest an activity, and then what could I do to create a sense of life. So initially I just built the train car, and you could walk up inside of it and look inside, and replicated the seats, and that was all just fine. I put lighting on the left-hand side, but then I also added a light fixture that's warm that sort of hits this wall that suggests warm light. But it wasn't until I added these prop trees that just continually go by that even though this is completely static and still, there is a sense of movement and life in here. And then the final touch was this carpet bag with the cane suggests that humans have been here. So in all the other worlds I've created since, it's all been informed by the work that I did in here to create little vignettes with very little polygons to give a sense of story and a sense of life. And I really think that whether you're doing a physical project, a theme park project, or you're doing something in 3D or something as simple as Horizon with their limited polygons, that there's a lot of opportunities to take what would otherwise be very static environments and add a little bit of life to them just by suggesting the people that might have been using the space or the people that might have used it in the past. So thanks a lot for coming along, and see you next time.